and you're tired. I understand it. When Pope John Paul II had his first opportunity to address the people of his native land, when they were still trapped behind the Iron Curtain and oppressed by a communist tyranny, do you remember his very first words? Be not afraid. What an amazing thing to say to people who were held captive by merciless and ruthless dictators. But he told them not to fear. My message to you is similar. Be not weary in well-doing. You are laying the foundations of a great work. We have come this far, but we have 17 days to go, and at this point, the greatest risk is complacency. So do not let up. Keep sprinting all the way through the tape. Whatever campaign you're helping, whether it's John Dennis or Rick Tubbs or Dave Harmer, campaign in crescendo. And remember the words of President George Washington. In his first State of the Union address, he said, "The destiny of self-government and the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty are finally staked on the success of the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people." Think about that. The destiny of self-government, not just here but everywhere, and the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty are finally staked on the success of the experiment entrusted to our hands. Now, we've gotten off on the wrong track. Will we set things right on November 2nd? Yeah. It is up to each one of us. Now, if you're tired of walking precincts, if you're tired of making phone calls, if you've contributed as much as you can and don't think you can contribute anymore, think back on who founded this nation. We recited together those precious words from the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't too long after that that General George Washington found himself, as the commander of the Continental Army, suffering terrible reverses. Early in the year 1776, there had been the exciting victory in the Battle of Bunker Hill. The colonists were enthused about the success of the revolutionary cause. But in New York, the tide turned. The strongest navy in the world threatened to overpower the American armies. They were saved by a providential fog never seen before in the summer that allowed Washington to let his men escape. And for the rest of the year, the army was engaged in basically a series of retreats. Finally, you know the story about how Washington led his men across the ice-choked Delaware. And they had the miraculous victories at Princeton against the Hessian mercenaries. But do you realize that by then the army had shrunk to about 1/7 its original size? There were perhaps no more than 3,000 men still able to fight. And they were poorly equipped. About a third of them lacked boots. They were marching through the snow with burlap wrapped around their feet. They left a trail of blood. Washington pleaded with the Continental Congress for supplies, for reimbursement of his own expenses, and it didn't come. And the fair weather soldiers faded. They went back to their farms and fields. They went back to their homes and businesses. General Washington and this tiny band of patriots managed to turn the tide of the Revolutionary War and bequeath to us the liberty that we now enjoy and we hope to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. And do you know, on that bitterly cold, snowy winter night, what the password was so they could get past their sentries? It was victory or death. Now, if you are tired, if you don't think you can give any more, if you've just had enough and you need to coast, realizing that even dirt needs fallow periods between plantings, don't stop yet. We have 17 days of hard work ahead. This country was founded by people who said to each other, victory or death, and they meant it. So let's come back to where we started. Those words of General Washington. What's going to happen in the next 17 days is up to us. And I believe that he was prophetic when he said, the destiny of self-government and the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty is finally staked on the success of the experiment, entrusted to the hands of we, the people. Now you know that the stakes are high. What is at stake on November 2nd? Our president has made no secret of his desire to transform America, nor has he made any secret of what he wants to transform us away from and into. He has explicitly questioned the so-called negative liberties guaranteed to us by our Constitution, and has spoken instead praisingly of a European-style social welfare state. And you look what has happened. First the bailouts, then the so-called stimulus, which hasn't stimulated anything but federal debt, and then cap and trade, and then Obamacare. Every time you turn around, Congress is borrowing another $1 trillion we don't have to spend on things we can't afford and don't want, and leaving the bill for future generations. What we're talking about here is not merely hypothetical. It has human consequences. We care about fiscal discipline because we love our freedom. John Adams, our great second president, said, there are two ways to enslave a nation, and he hated slavery. One is by arms, he said, the other is by debt. Well, the current political class in Washington has chosen the latter. And let's be frank, this explosion in federal spending that so offends us and so jeopardizes our liberty had its origins under a Republican president and a Republican Congress. But let's also be honest enough to say that it has accelerated massively under their Democratic successors. We've gone from going 5 or 10 miles an hour over the speed limit to going 50 or 60 miles an hour over the speed limit. It is unsustainable. We saw what happened earlier this year in Greece. You see what's happening now in Sacramento. That's happening in Washington, D.C. in a couple of years if we don't turn things around. Now, I have 4 very important reasons for caring what happens in Congress. Their names are Madison, Jonas, Ariel, and Benjamin. They are ages 14, 13, 11, and 9, and they are my kids. And you probably have similar reasons for caring. Elaine and I have taught them to work before they play, to save before they spend, and they do. They embody the classic American virtues of independence, integrity, industry, self-reliance, and thrift. They are hard workers, they are frugal, they know how to budget, they know how to save, and yet they are deeply, deeply in debt anyway. You take the national debt as it exists now, divide it equally among every man, woman, and child in the country, it comes to over $40,000 apiece. And it is scheduled to more than double in less than 8 years. That means by the time my younger kids are old enough to vote, their share of the national debt is already going to be pushing $100,000. Now, all of us who've worked in business understand there is no such thing as an unpaid debt. If we won't pay the principal, their generation is trapped paying the interest. And my kids can look forward to having to pay over their working life just as their share of interest on the national debt we ran up before they were old enough to do anything about it, over $250,000. That's true. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that makes them indentured servants. They are not truly free. They already have a price on their head. What most people would spend on a house or on 2 medical school educations, we have already spent, and what do we have to show for it? Nothing. We've blown it on transfer payments, bridges to nowhere, and all the obscene explosion of spending we've seen over the last couple of years. Well, that is what is at stake. President Reagan reminded us that no generation could just inherit liberty. It had to be fought for and earned generation by generation, anew again. Now that's what we're called to do on November 2nd. Join me, let's retake this country in a second American Revolution. Thank you.